Fox News alert on immigration, laying out a long list of hardline demands in exchange for extending the protections thousands of young immigrants had under the DACA deal. And Democrats are already indicating many of those demands are off the table. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, here today. Harris Faulkner, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy, the editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, the chairman of GOPAC and Republican strategist David Avella is here, and he is outnumbered to kick off this Monday, this week it is. It's already been a busy morning.
Happy Columbus Day. Hopefully we're all going to celebrate with the good Italian heritage of a little pasta and a little red wine.
Did you bring food?
in the green room.
David, you are my hero. Sounds lovely. All right, let's get started. The White House releasing President Trump's list of immigration priorities. The president saying those reforms must be part of any legislation to extend the protections from deportation many young immigrants had under President Obama's DACA program. They include overhauling the country's green card system to make it merit-based while decreasing the number of family members sponsored from abroad, cracking down on unaccompanied minors entering the country, and building Mr. Trump's promised border wall and deny federal grants to sanctuary cities. The policies could end up being a deal breaker for Democrats. Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin saying in a statement Congress has to act now on legislation to protect dreamers, and lawmakers can debate the White House policies later. And Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi saying this in a statement. We told the president at our meeting that we were open to reasonable border security measures alongside the DREAM Act. But this list goes so far beyond what is reasonable. This proposal fails to represent any attempt at compromise. But White House counselor Kellyanne Conway says it's up to Democrats now to make this work.
They should actually be calling their friends Chuck and Nancy to say, you know, are you going to give up this deal because you don't want to, why don't you want a border wall constructed? Why don't you want more immigration judges and agents? And why isn't a reasonable policy to limit chain migration? And also to stop these visa overstays and to make sure people that are flouting the law once they're here, breaking the law once they're here, go back.
So, David, Democrats calling the president's suggestions or wish list, if you will, whatever you want to call it, so far beyond reasonable. It leads to the question Kellyanne Conway posed, so what is reasonable to them?
All the things the president pointed out, he talked about during the campaign. These aren't new proposals. And what Democrats are going to have to decide is, they talk about, oh, we understand how we lost the election, and we're now going to go into middle America and explain to them that we really do care about them. And yet policies that they very much favor, middle America favors, the Democrats are all opposed to. So, quite frankly, it is their time. Are they truthful, and are they going to be for policies that middle Americans want and support reasonable border security, which the president has laid out? GOPAC did a study during the last election of women voters in Ohio. Democrats, Republicans, and independents all talked about they wanted border security.
So, Katie, I mean, can the president strike a deal? I mean, clearly he's reaching across the aisle saying he's willing to work with Democrats on that. What happens?
Look, Democrats have been saying they want comprehensive immigration reform. This is it. I mean, this is President Trump saying, you want DACA, and the real question is going to be, why are Democrats willing to give up DACA for the sake of being against something like a border wall or visa overstay enforcement? There's three different components to this. The interior enforcement, they're implementing new judges to work on the backlog. There's a border security component, which is essential to people who want reform because they've been promised before, as long as you give us border security first, then we'll implement amnesty, and it's been the opposite, and we haven't seen any results from that. And the third thing is a new system that is merit-based rather than just bringing anyone and everyone in, but based on work ethic, what the economy needs, based on a system of points. So we'll see how that goes. But in terms of the politics here, the White House is actually on top of this because the majority of the country believes that DACA should stay, and if Democrats want to oppose this bill based on that, they're going to be against the Dreamers who are part of their base.
But based on the fact that there's so much laid out by the president here, Kennedy, certainly there's room for negotiation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was the point of the meeting that he had with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi when they went to the White House. And, you know, they all emerged from the meeting claiming victory. But really the only thing that who was victorious in the scenario were the Dreamers. However, they were the ones who went, and if you remember, they very loudly protested and shouted down Nancy Pelosi because they didn't appreciate being used as political pawns. I think that was actually very smart on the part of the president, because he knew that bringing Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi into his evil lair would create such problematic optics for all of them, but particularly them. But there's something that they all want here. You know, they want the Dreamers to be shielded. He wants the wall. He wants border security. And these are things that Democrats have already voted for in the past. The question is, how badly do Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi want to shield Dreamers from deportation? If they really want it, they're going to have to give on these other elements of security that they have voted for in the past.
It's called skin in the game. And he's trying to get Democrats to do that full force. And that gives Republicans some cover, too, because it allows them to say that they are willing to bend on some things, too. But, you know, I want to get to a point of fact that I think is important for Americans to know, because I think sometimes Democrats breeze over this. So are we of the understanding that when we talk about getting rid of DACA going forward, there is not a grandfathering in of the people who are already here, or how will that work exactly?
When the policy was rolled out, the administration was pretty clear that if you have no criminal record, you're not going to be deported.
All right.
As part of that. Now, all of that said,
you'll notice that's not in what Democrats are saying. They're saying we're ripping this off like a Band-Aid and taking every hair off your arm with it.
Every Democrat needs to be asked, how much longer are they going to allow young kids to be sexually abused, as we just saw in New Jersey, from an illegal alien?
I know it hit
how
like
long
an
are we going to allow kids to be murdered? And what policies are you going to pursue to end that?
Well, that's the problem when you don't have comprehensive immigration reform, as Katie was talking about. When you do this through executive fiat from one administration to the next, and then cruelly, you know, create the ability for it to be taken away.
But Democrats have to own that, and they have to also make the point, if they want to have skin in the game in any regard, that this isn't wholesale wiping away DACA. This is an opportunity, by the way, for Republicans to say, look, we're not the heartless ones. We actually want to, on their part, put in legislation that protects these people who are staying in this country and have a plan going forward. I'm just saying that there's a little bit on the bone for each side.
Well, and Republicans can take the high road here in the sense that this is what 80+% of the country wants. They want DACA recipients to be able to stay here as long as they haven't committed a violent crime. Right. As we all know, as Harris often points out, coming into the country illegally is a crime. However, if you don't have a violent crime, they're willing to let you stay. Now, Democrats now, I think, might be willing to negotiate with the president. And I'm not talking about Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Nancy Pelosi is in a lot of trouble with her caucus in the House. She has been facing opposition for weeks about not being able to actually get things done for Democrats.
Linda Sanchez just came out
with her base. And so they're saying, we want to protect
DACA
recipients.
Down.
Where are you, Nancy? You better not, you know.
And by the way, Nancy Pelosi was using the Dreamers as a political chip.
Well,
she absolutely was. She takes them for granted. She assumes that she's going to have their votes and their friends' votes, whoever has already obtained legal citizenship, and therefore she dismisses.
And that's why they bum rushed the lectern when she was up there a couple of weeks ago.
We remember that. But David, let's talk about the inclusion of the border wall in the president's plans here.
It's an issue that Americans have said they wanted. It's something that we voted on in 2006 and said we were going to do it. But this plan is so much more than just the wall. It's getting more ICE agents. It's getting more lawyers. And this is really a moment of truth, not only for Democrats, but let's talk about specific Democrats. Joe Manchin, John Tester, Claire McCaskill, all of those Democrats who are up in 2018 in states that favor these policies, who are going to have to go to voters and talk about what they did to make America more secure. And are they going to vote with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, or are they going to do what their constituents
Can I just add one quick thing to what Katie said, which I think is so important? It's this idea of the merit-based immigration, which doesn't necessarily mean you have a PhD, but the idea of factoring work ethic into it. And if there's a way of truly measuring that, so you have the hardest working people, no matter where they came from, no matter what job they do, so employers in this country, if they're in parts of the country where unemployment is so low, they have a greater choice of people to choose from, and the best possible people. That would be a complete boost for the economy.
What you're talking about is that they're not just bringing their thirst for citizenship, they're bringing their dreams about other things. things. I want to just quickly revisit
country.
What happened in New Jersey. And by the way, that was back on September 18th, but it hit like an alert wire this weekend as the information was disseminated about that illegal immigrant that sexually assaulted a 6-year-old girl after breaking into her home. I mean, that's been a huge conversation this weekend that I'm sure is going to gain heat as we go forward this week.
We've got to leave it there. A growing showdown between President Trump and Republican Senator Bob Corker. Their war of words and what it means for the president's agenda moving forward. Plus, Vice President Pence walking out of the Colts 49ers game yesterday after several 49ers, 20 of them, protested during the national anthem. Now a Democratic senator blasting Pence's move. We debate. Fox News alert. We just wanted to give you an update on the president's schedule today. We just got word that he departed the White House at 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time wearing a ball cap with Senator Lindsey Graham in golf attire. They did head to Trump National Golf Course in Sterling, Virginia to play a round of golf. We will let you know if there are any comments or anything that comes out of that. Just wanted to update you.
I love the part of that report, too, that they weren't sure where they were going yet, so now we know where they're going in their caps. All right, President Trump is hitting back at one of his increasingly vocal Republican critics. Have you heard about this? Outgoing Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. He chairs the Foreign Relations Committee, and the war of words is raising questions about what it could mean for the president's agenda moving forward, that they are not getting along. The president tweeted this: Senator Bob Corker begged me to endorse him for re-election in Tennessee. I said no, and he dropped out, said he could not win without my endorsement. He also wanted to be Secretary of State. I said in all caps, no thanks. He is also largely responsible for the horrendous Iran deal, ! Hence, I would fully expect Corker to be a negative voice and stand in the way of our great agenda. Didn't have the guts to run. End quote. The senator fired back, tweeting this: It's a shame the White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning, end quote. And Corker's harsh words for the president continued in an interview with the New York Times, where Corker said President Trump was treating his office like a reality show with reckless threats toward other countries that could set the nation on the path to World War III. There were no wasted characters in any of those tweets. They were right bullseye. Why is this happening?
I had a feeling you'd come to me first on this.
Well, you know the president. You particularly know the president, so.
Please.
Senator Corker is going to find out that, as many politicians do, once you announce your retirement, your effectiveness goes down by the day until you actually retire. And while he may have this battle with the president right now on tweets, he's not going to be able to get his Senate colleagues to say, hey, let's vote against tax cuts because I don't agree with the president on certain matters, so I'm going to tweet against him.
So some of the mainstream media are having a delicious delight with this, Katie.
Yeah.
From NPR, one of the reporters said Corker could be a bigger threat to the Republican tax bill than the party realizes. The opposite of what you just said, David. Is she right?
Look, if these senators are going to hurt the American people and not vote for something like tax reform or immigration reform, or if the Iran deal gets decertified by the White House, somehow recertifying it through Congress on the Iran deal because they have a personal beef with the president, that is their problem, and they will face the voters as a result of that. You can count on it. Because if they're going to act like their personal matters with the president of the United States and name-calling on Twitter, I don't care who comes from first, is going to be their priority instead of the business of the people, they're going to pay for it.
So, Kennedy, I mentioned that Corker is currently the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and he went on to say that he thinks that the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, Defense, and the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, are people who help separate our country from chaos with the president each day. That's a big dig at President Trump. Is that appropriate?
It is. No, I think a lot of it is unnecessary. And, you know, I do think that when you engage in stuff like that, if you're running for re-election, it's going to be very problematic. Obviously, he's not. So he's free from some of those party shackles that normally
But do you attack the president? Is that appropriate?
Well, I think it's okay to punch back if the president takes a few shots at you. That's one thing. And one dig is fine, but to give, if the Democrats are the opposition party and they are your enemy, they are feasting on all of the tidbits that Corker is serving. You know, he's talking about how it's so chaotic in the White House. This is Bob Corker. He's a Republican senator from Tennessee. He's talking about how it's so chaotic in the White House. It's essentially a game of containment, and everyone there is just trying to contain the president and protect the country from him. him and protect the president
what I think?
from himself.
I don't think people like this. I don't think the average American likes to sit at home and see this happening, this sort of rhetoric, exchange of words, whether it's the same party, different parties. I was chatting with Governor John Sununu this morning, who said, you know, look, Republicans better do one thing, and they better focus on tax reform. I mean, there's an aggressive agenda laid out for now to the end of the year, possibly into the new year. There's a lot of work to do.
So, David, with that having been said, Republicans can probably get tax reform now because they're going to pull across a couple of Democrats, which is, you know, amazing, I suppose, in the scheme of things, because we haven't seen that happen necessarily anywhere else effectively. But most importantly, it speaks to this issue that if there's some Republicans who don't want to get on board, it won't stop this president, potentially.
We need tax cuts. If Democrats want to come along, great. It's also why the 2018 elections become all the more important. And talking about Tennessee alone, you're going to have Bob Corker leave, and you're going to take a solid anti-establishment conservative in Marsha Blackburn, who right now is the only one running, a big Trump ally who he will be having after the 2018 elections to help him.
Yeah, you know, the part that Sandra was just mentioning, that shooting inside the tent. Yeah, I'm going to guess no one really likes to watch that happen.
Especially Ronald Reagan.
Well, yes, of course. We'll move on. 1 week now after the Las Vegas massacre, Wynn Resort CEO Steve Wynn says the killer was known to staffers at the casinos, but he gave no clues.
This is a man who behaved rationally, privately, a little introverted, liked to play video poker, but he was a rational man.
Meanwhile, new details on the note found inside the killer's room as police expand their investigation into what happened there. What we are learning now, we'll share with you. And Democrats are ramping up their push for gun control after that. Lawmakers in both political parties admit that no law could have prevented the Las Vegas attack. So is the gun control conversation exactly the one to have right now? A lot of people say it should be about mental health, whatever. We'll talk about it. Stay close.
Fox News alert on the investigation into the Las Vegas massacre. Federal investigators searching gunman Stephen Paddock's home again, as we are learning more about the note found in the hotel room where he opened fire on a crowd of concertgoers more than a week ago. That note contained calculations on the distance and trajectory from his 32nd floor room to the people below. Meantime, despite getting more than 1,000 tips and leads, investigators still don't have a motive. Dan Springer is live in Las Vegas. Dan?
Yeah, hi, Sandra. The FBI is doing what everyone does when they can't find something. They're retracing their steps, going back over ground already covered just in case they missed something the first go-around. And that's why yesterday they were back out at Stephen Paddock's house in Mesquite, Nevada. On the first search a week ago, they found 19 guns and several pounds of explosives. Then, after interviewing Paddock's girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, they got a second federal search warrant, which was executed Sunday. A local police official said that it was just to photograph items. The FBI won't comment. Late Saturday night and into Sunday morning, police and FBI profilers did a second long 4-hour interview with Paddock's brother Eric, who lives in Florida. Eric flew to Las Vegas to have the killer's body cremated and handle his finances. He wants to establish a trust for all the victims. Last night, 60 Minutes aired an interview with the first Las Vegas SWAT team to get inside Paddock's room at the Mandalay Bay, where they found his body, thousands of spent shell casings, ammunition, and 23 high-powered rifles. They said the gunman had screwed shut the hallway emergency exit door, and they were worried about an ambush.
It's like a deadly game of hide and seek, because when you're the one hiding, you always know where the person that's looking for you is before they see you. I remember thinking, man, I wish I had my dog with me, because, you know, it's nice to have him lead the team.
Jason Aldean, the country singer who was on stage when the shooting began, was back in Las Vegas yesterday. His wife posted a picture on Instagram. The couple met with victims of the shooting who are still hospitalized. The Aldeans called them some of the strongest people they've ever met. And last night, parts of Las Vegas went dark exactly 1 week after the mass killing. Marquees were turned off from 10:05 to 10:16 p.m. in honor of the 58 people killed and nearly 500 people injured. And as we come back out live, you can see the police tape is still up, as this is still a crime scene. We still see people working on the fence out here and cops still milling around inside where this concert took place a week ago. Back to you, Sandra.
Hard to believe it's been over a week. Dan Springer, thank you.
Meanwhile, the politics of it all, Senator Dianne Feinstein admitting no law would have helped stop the Las Vegas attack, but still, she, along with other Democrat lawmakers, are calling for new gun control legislation.
Regulations aren't going to do it. We need a law. It can't be changed by another president. And I hope that Americans will step up and say, enough is enough. Congress, do something.
I am willing to move forward with the Republicans on banning these bump stocks. This is an important moment. The NRA, at least in the time that I've been in Congress, has never been willing to change U.S. gun laws.
It's the job of Congress to then step in and say, that was not our intent. We did not want to provide this loophole in the law, so we should fix it. I don't know how many innocent Americans need to die in mass shootings like this before we're willing to simply have these discussions.
NRA Executive Director Chris Cox criticized Democrats for pushing policy at a time like this.
There used to be a common decency in this country where people paused from talking about policy. Unfortunately, with Dianne Feinstein and Michael Bloomberg, they want to exploit a tragedy from day one. It's shameful, but apparently that's the new normal.
Republican Congressman Scott Taylor of Virginia says legislation is simply not the answer.
Let's look at this instance, because there's, like I said, there's a lot of rhetoric out there. You got to do background checks and all these things. Well, this guy went through background checks. And there was his brother didn't know anything wrong with him. We didn't. Look, I'm still struggling with that profile as well, too. I don't understand. I think there's probably some other information that's going to come out. But the reality is, when you look at some of the things that have been proposed on the other side of people who want gun control, none of them would have done anything about this issue.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's that one-on-one match that you're looking for, David. Well, where is the answer in all of this, and can we legislate it? The NRA saying, look, we can review it, which was a huge step by them. But if you want to say this is not political, let's consider the fact that Dianne Feinstein, like an hour or two ago, announced that she's going to run for re-election?
Good point. Victims in times like these, psychologists tell you, need stability and the feelings of security. And to now start to have a gun control conversation doesn't give them either one of those two things. Now, that said, the Republicans in Congress have said, let's look at these bump stocks. Many gun owners I've talked to weren't even aware of bump stocks until this massacre occurred. And so you will have some discussion on that, and perhaps we can get some movement on it.
Kennedy, whenever we have a mass shooting, and this, of course, being the worst in modern U.S. history, but with each one of these, there's an opportunity weeks later for lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to go and talk about this. That never happens. Democrats don't lead that charge at that point. They don't want to say radical Islam when certain things have happened in this country. They want to move on beyond the conversation. Why is that?
I don't know, but it's interesting because we always, at least from President Obama, would get a gun control lecture, even if it were related to terrorism.
But his party did nothing to move his dreams forward, apparently.
And Orlando. But it's really sad because it's super tough for the victims' families in Las Vegas because, this is a really convenient conversation to be having today. It also can be incredibly insensitive depending on the timing, but we're also not talking about the individual victims of gun violence in places like Chicago, or people who are so despondent and depressed they take their own lives with a gun, or domestic violence victims.
Oh, that's a good point.
Are any of those deaths less tragic because they were singular? I would argue that they're not. Go ahead and talk to their families.
No, it's an excellent
However,
point.
Sometimes government can't keep you safe, and that's the unfortunate reality.
So Katie, the Boston Globe did this whole report on gun facts, and I thought this was interesting, and it points to what Kennedy's saying. Millions of semi-automatic assault weapons are in the hands of friends, neighbors, countrymen. They are legal. Vast majority will never harm a human life. The fact of the matter is most gun deaths are suicides.
That's exactly correct, and the pro-gun control anti-rights lobby likes to lump them in all the same category. But I just want to say to Congressman Scott Taylor's point, he says, I don't understand this. I don't get this. I'm not going to understand this. And I totally agree with him. How could we understand, even when we get the motive for why this guy did this, we won't understand because we're not like him. There are things that certain people do that we will never understand because they are evil, they are heinous, there's no explanation for it, and I actually find it offensive that people like Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein are constantly running to law-abiding American citizens and asking for a logical explanation for something that cannot be understood or explained.
Absolutely right. And something that's equally complex, of course, is the Iran deal. Iran now threatening U.S. regional military bases if new sanctions are imposed on the regime. This comes as President Trump prepares to announce his strategy on Iran this week. The president, in an interview that aired on Saturday, again suggested he may decertify the Iran nuclear deal. Watch this.
We have problems. The Iran deal is terrible. Should have never been made. It should have never. It leads to nuclear weapons for Iran. I'm very unhappy with the deal. I'm very unhappy with their attitude. The spirit of the deal certainly is not there because they're all over the place causing trouble.
Today, Iran warning the U.S. against additional sanctions, including designating its Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. An Iranian foreign minister spokesman saying, quote, I hope they apply the necessary prudence, but if they do move towards such a decision, Iran's response will definitely be decisive, crushing, and fierce. That sounds moderate. Meantime, lawmakers back here at home split over whether to keep the nuclear deal in place. Watch.
When you have the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, China, and the United States all agreeing to support something, and then the United States goes through an election, the new president pulls us out. What does that say?
One of the fundamental flaws of the nuclear deal was it just focused very narrowly on their nuclear program, not on the broader range of Iran's malicious activities. And so I think that's the goal of the White House here. Let's have a broader strategy that looks at everything that Iran does.
So if the president decertifies the deal, lawmakers in Congress will then have 60 days to decide whether to reimpose sanctions. So, Katie, is the best idea to take an already confusing and chaotic situation and hand it over to Congress, where both parties are in the midst of mutual civil wars?
Right. That is one thing that people are concerned about. If the president decides to decertify the deal, they're going to put it over to Congress, and if they don't do anything, then it will be decertified. They'll have to start over again. But I want to give everyone a little bit more context about what this means. The president talked about the spirit of the deal. And we remember when this was going through, President Obama and Josh Earnest up at the podium in the press briefing room said that they weren't concerned about Iran's behavior in terms of terrorism or anything else. That is not something that the Trump administration is willing to accept. When they talk about the spirit of the deal, they're talking about lumping in a whole bunch of other behavioral issues, including Iran's ties to North Korea, how they're working with them on their nuclear program, Iran's funding of Hezbollah to take over governments in places like Lebanon and other countries in the Middle East, and placing U.S. interest back into the deal as being the priority, and letting go of Iran's destabilization of the region. And so this is a bigger issue for the administration that addresses things that the Obama administration refused to do.
It's an excellent point. So you don't have then, David, the narrow scoping of the original deal that probably did need some side deals that we don't know about, right? Because when you narrow cast like that, in order to scoop up some of those other issues, you would have to have some side deals, I would imagine. And don't forget, they had our men in uniform on their knees on that ship, right? I mean, that was a visual that they made a statue of right after that deal was struck.
Well, first, Senator Feinstein's comments were outrageous, that somehow you have an election and a new president takes us in a new direction. And to her, that was unbelievable in her comment that we just played there. That said, and the president has a much bigger issue, and you all have talked about this, is that you have an Iran who has year after year broken agreements that they've gotten into. We have much evidence that they and North Korea are working together on both of their nuclear programs. And how and when are many Democratic leaders going to accept that one day L.A. or Denver or Seattle can be hit by a nuclear weapon by North Korea?
But what about the conflict within this White House about how to proceed at this point?
White Houses have had conflict in the past. The ultimate decider is the President of the United States. And once he gets the information
but General Dunford's saying, I'd stay in it. I'd leave it alone.
Well, he's not the president. The president makes the ultimate decision. He will take advice from his advisors. As we saw when he had laid out his Afghanistan policy, he had a different direction that he wanted to go. And quite frankly, he's not been given enough credit that he actually sat down and listened to his advisors and then made a decision to go in the direction that they ultimately did. The ultimate decision is with the President of the United States, and it's what he decides.
And speaking of which, President Trump continuing to chip away at Obamacare, gearing up to sign another executive order on health care this week. But will he be able to make good on his campaign promise to repeal and replace and is reaching out to Democrats on this issue. A good idea. We will debate, discuss, and we will hypnotize you next.
Hypnotize.
Hi.
Welcome back. President Trump reportedly gearing up to sign an executive order on health care this week that will allow individuals to band together to buy certain insurance policies across state lines. This after the president said he would be open to make a temporary deal with Democrats in order to kickstart health care reform. Watch.
Obamacare is a disaster. The numbers are out. It's exploding like I said it would. So basically, if we could do a one-year deal or a two-year deal as a temporary measure, you'll have block granting ultimately to the states, which is what the Republicans want. That really is a repeal and replace.
But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer releasing this statement, quote, "The president wanted to make another run at repeal and replace, and I told the president that's off the table. If he wants to work together to improve the existing health care system, we Democrats are open to his suggestions." Sandra, is this the president trying to make the free market work?
Well, that's what we can all hope for. But when you quote Chuck Schumer, I think we sit here and go, oh, boy. You know, you get this indication that somehow, you know, he and the president are trying to work together. They're trying to get something done. And then they walk out of their meetings and they issue these tweets or statements and you say, okay, so things went nowhere. But time is of the essence here, right? The clock is ticking. Yeah. And here we are already in mid-October.
Can I just, to your point, because it's so critical about the free market. On tax reform and even on immigration, I do think that Republicans and Democrats have a lot of common ground and they can find ways to work together. I don't think that's the case with health care. Yeah. Because I think Democrats, deep in their cold little commie hearts, they definitely want single-payer, socialist, government-run health care, and Republicans are leaning toward more free market solutions.
They're trying.
They have to competently figure out what that means.
Right.
Across state lines, great. Block grant to the states, fantastic. Help people out. Figure it out, but I don't think this is the room for, this is the time rather for bipartisan.
David, what about that? The question is, too, what does full repeal mean? Because Republicans are totally willing to leave in some goodies with Obamacare, whether it's insurance till you're 26, pre-existing conditions, and they still try to call it full repeal. So should they be giving that up in order to get something passed?
Well, there are areas where liberal and conservative think tank experts have come together, and they do find common ground that Republicans and Democrats could come together on and get it resolved. What is quite frustrating is, one, lasting change has to come through Congress, and we as Republicans, the majority, haven't gotten that done, and that is very frustrating. All of that said, the direction that needs to go, and you pointed out, was we got to get it back to the states. Let's block grant this. Let's allow states that are innovative are going to do good things, and other states are going to follow them. That is the key. Let me also add, this discussion has all been about how much government is going to pay people for their insurance, when there are so many other problems wrong with our health care system. The lack of doctors that we have, the need for more medical innovation, the more need for more drug research. None of that has been talked about with Obamacare. In fact, Obamacare made the doctor shortage worse.
It gets extinguished, though. It absolutely does. The more government oppression you put into health care and insurance, that's where you, unfortunately, you snuff out the beautiful flames of technology, innovation, and cancer research. For those of us who have family members who have suffered through chemotherapy, who have really specific types of cancer, we want the FDA out of the way. We want the good doctors and researchers have these wonderfully funded campaigns so they can find the best drugs in the world. And
that's not going to happen with Obamacare.
No, it's not, unfortunately.
So, Katie, I just want to add to your point, because you brought up an excellent point. So if there was ever a hope for Republicans to try to get this done without Democrats, we passed that date because we're going to need 60 votes now. Right? So how do you pull Democrats over? Well, even within your own party, you got to scoop up as many as you can so that you don't need more than 8.
Right.
And the problem is, can you wipe away some of the goodies that are retained by not fully repealing Obamacare in order to give the 52 out of your party a chance to come together? And I don't think that they're stuck on those two things. I think it's broader than that. I think it's an ideological shift or difference between Republicans within the own party. So you're going to need probably north of those 8 votes to bring you into passage with the Democrats. And that sounds, as Kennedy has put in a different way, like a pipe dream.
Right.
The cold heart part, I didn't conjure that up.
Well, David, the president is golfing with Senator Lindsey Graham today. He's been trying to work on another push to repeal Obamacare. He made those comments before leaving.
You think they're talking
today.
about that?
Do you think that they'll be talking about that? And what is their strategy with this one-year thing?
Hopefully one of them will get a hole-in-one and they'll all be in a good mood and come to agreement on that.
There you go. We'll see what happens. Vice President Mike Pence leaving an NFL game after some players took a knee during the national anthem. Democrats slamming the gesture while the president says it was the right move. Who is right? We'll debate.
Harris looking forward to it. Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence walking out of his home state Indianapolis Colts Stadium yesterday after several members of the opposing San Francisco 49ers took a knee during the national anthem. He tweeted a photo of himself and Mrs. Pence standing with the caption, "We are proud to stand with all our Colts for our soldiers, our flag, and our national anthem." President Trump praising the move, tweeting, "I asked Vice President Pence to leave the stadium if any players kneeled, disrespecting our country. I am proud of him and Second Lady Karen." But not everyone was supportive of the vice president's actions. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy tweeting, "Don't let these guys tell you they are fiscal conservatives. This was a multi-million-dollar political stunt paid for by taxpayers." And San Francisco 49ers safety Eric Reed, who joined Colin Kaepernick early on in his protests last year, saying this. Watch.
With the information that I have, the last time he's been to a Colts game was 3 years ago. So this looks like a PR stunt to me. He knew our team has had the most players' protests. He knew that we were probably going to do it again. And so this is what systemic oppression looks like. A man with power comes to the game, tweets a couple of things out, and leaves the game with an attempt to thwart our efforts.
David, this is a tough one. I mean, look, the vice president said he and his wife were not going to stay anywhere and dignify disrespect for our military and for our flag.
It's not a tough one, Sandra. The president and the vice president are giving voice to the millions of Americans, the majority of Americans, who believe standing during the American anthem is a way to honor a country that is the envy of the world.
I say tough one because the vice president is being criticized for protesting the protesters, and the protesters say we have the right to protest.
Let's keep in mind
and they're criticizing him. So am I making sense here? That's tough to try to figure out.
They do have the right to protest in these publicly funded stadiums. Yes, they do. But, you know, Katie and I could stand up on the couch and throw the old pigskin back and forth, but it might be a little bit distracting. And we both know that because
it'd be very fun.
It would be so
We're pretty good at
Katie's
a phenomenal.
On a Friday
big
show.
Studio, so
but having said that, where have we gotten with the protests? That's the question. Where are we now? Because it's all about you're on my team or you're not on my team. If you support people's protests, you hate this country. If you walk out, that means you're more of a patriot, a greater American. And I think that there is so much disconnection in this country, and people delight at that.
Here's where we are. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones. Remember, he knelt with his players and then stood for the national anthem, making a big statement. Here's where he stands now. Listen.
We cannot, in the NFL, in any way, give the implication that we tolerated disrespecting the flag. We cannot do that. And I know the vice president did leave because, in his opinion, the teams work. There is no equivocation here. We'll stand for the flag. If there's anything that is disrespectful to the flag, then we will not play.
Well, it's about time. I mean, really, it's taken this long? Roger Goodell is the one who should be saying that because he's in charge of the franchise, and they should have implemented a rule a very long time ago about standing for the anthem. They have policies that are in their own handbooks or policy books saying how you're supposed to stand for the anthem. And if you don't want to, that's fine, but you're going to pay a fine just like they do in the NBA. Here's the thing. What Mike Pence did is actually not that controversial. He's doing what millions of Americans are doing in their living rooms on Sunday and Monday, turning the TV off, watching something else, or not watching football at all.
Or not buying tickets to go to
and
the
burning their
he's
season
also
tickets.
from
Exactly.
Texas. You know, I'm sure there are a lot of people in Dallas who are calling the front office saying, I'm burning my jersey, I'm not buying season tickets next year if this nonsense continues. But San Francisco, it's a bastion of progressivism, and Colin Pooperdink, you know, he's really encouraged.
To be clear, over 20 players did not stand for the national anthem on Sunday.
People go to NFL games to be entertained, not to see political protest.
But the players union has responded with a statement just a short time ago saying we should not stifle these discussions and cannot allow our rights to become subservient to the very opinions our Constitution protects. So stark contrast to Jerry Jones saying stand or don't play. That's where he stands. Outnumbered in just a moment. Many thanks to David Avella. Good to have you here, and Kennedy and Katie.
Great to be here.
Grazie mille.
Happy Monday.
Monday is officially kicked off.
Pasta and red wine in the green room. Go Italians, go
You're
America.
paying, right?
That's right.
All right. I guess you're in New York, where they have the best Italian.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. We're back on TV tomorrow at noon Eastern. Outnumbered Overtime with Harris Faulkner starts right now.